Hello there, my friend. My name is Pastor Greg, and this is Transforming the World. This week we are taking a look at the Christian characteristic of truthfulness. It's an attribute that should be found within the life of every Christian. We are to be honest. We are to be truthful. And God has commanded this. It comes from Leviticus 19. As God looked at the rest of the world, he told his people that they should be set apart, different from the world. And one of the areas that God said we are to be different is our honesty, our truthfulness. That when we tell somebody we're selling them a pound of ground beef, well, by golly, it should be a pound of ground beef. We should not tip our scales in our favor. So honesty, truthfulness is something that God expects in our lives. And yet, even the best of us sometimes can have a momentary lapse. Even the best of us can allow that sinful nature of lying and dishonesty creep out from the dark corners of our hearts. And the next thing you know, we do something or say something that we know we should not have. How do we respond? Well, we're going to take a look at an incident in King David's life and hopefully learn a very valuable lesson on how to respond when we're not always completely truthful. You're watching Transforming the World, and my name is Pastor Greg. Well, in 2 Samuel, we learn a story about King David. It happens in King David's life. King David meets a young lady by the name of Bathsheba. Perhaps you know the story. Her husband, Uriah, was out fighting the war. David was back at the palace in Jerusalem, sees Bathsheba bathing. Hormones get the best of him, and he has an affair. And what ends up happening is Bathsheba becomes pregnant, and then David tries to do his best to cover up that sin, to cover up that lie. Eventually, what he does is he sends Uriah to the front of the battle lines, and just when the fighting gets intense, everybody else draws back, leaving Uriah on his own, and he ends up getting killed. It's one of the low points in David's life. I find that kind of bothersome because prior to that, David had been living such an incredible life. I mean, his behavior was just stellar. His faith was spectacular. What happened? I mean, you want to cry out and say, "No, David, why? Why would you do this?" David had a lapse. He had a momentary lapse in his life. Here's something that I believe we need to keep in the front of our minds as we strive to live a life that honors God. You see, no matter how hard we try, no matter what we do, that sin nature is still lurking deep within us. It's a darkness that's there. We are never completely removed of that sin nature in this life. When we die and are transformed by God at the rapture, the sin nature is burnt away. I love that. But in the meantime, you and I struggle daily to keep that sin nature in check. Thankfully, we have the Holy Spirit there that helps us do it. The Holy Spirit helps keep that sin nature in check. But there are times, like in David's life, when we do something wrong. We do something that we know we shouldn't have. We tell a lie. We deceive somebody. We could have been living a life where telling the truth and doing things above the board, being honest, was actually our habit. I mean, we could practice telling the truth and being honest so long that it's just it's like second nature to us, and still there would come a moment when we would sin. And that's the ugliness of sin. The ugliness of sin is still present in us, which is why we need to do everything that we can daily to keep that sin nature in check. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, how we feed the spirit and starve the flesh. We feed what is right in our lives and starve all that sin. And I'll talk about that later on this week. But there's a lesson here that I think that you and I could benefit from as we strive to be honest, as we strive to be truthful. Because what ends up happening is God confronts David. If you remember much about the story, there's a prophet by the name of Nathan who confronts David about what he has done. David had a momentary weakness. He was complicit in having Uriah killed. The list of sins in this whole incident is just piled one after the other. David would do one deceptive thing to hide something else that he had done wrong, and it got completely out of control. God confronts David, but his response is what I wanted to talk to you about. You see, when Nathan confronted David, David responded in a way that you and I need to respond. I'd like for you to look at Psalm 51 when you get the chance. Psalm 51 is David's response to God when he was confronted by Nathan the prophet. And in Psalm 51, David, he doesn't make excuses. He doesn't point the blame somewhere else. Certainly not like Adam and then Eve did. Adam blamed Eve for giving him the apple, and Eve blamed Satan. But David, on the other hand, thank the Lord, he comes to his senses. And he goes to God, and he confesses. He's like, against you and you alone have I sinned, Lord. I've done this against you. Created me a clean heart, he says. God says, or David says, look, I know you desire honesty even from the womb. From the moment that we are conceived, God desires that we are truthful and honest. And David admits that he wasn't. And David's response to God in this psalm is a demonstration of truthfulness in action. Confession of sin is truthfulness in action. You see, there's a lot of times when we sin and the Holy Spirit convicts us of that sin. Oh, we could lie. We could make all kinds of excuses. We could pull a Flip Wilson. The devil made me do it. You know how Flip Wilson used to do that? Or we could be honest. Honest with God, honest with ourselves. And get down on our knees and say, you know what, Lord? I sinned. Doesn't matter the severity of that sin. It really doesn't. But when we are confronted about our dishonesty, our lying, our deceitfulness, or whatever sin that we may commit in those times of momentary weakness, we are the most truthful with ourselves and the most truthful with God when we confess to him our sin. I don't want you to miss that. I know David had a terrible moment of weakness. His sin, not only did he have to pay for the penalty of his sin, but so did his first son that was born with Bathsheba. That boy ends up dying. It's sad, it really is, that David's moment of weakness ended up affecting so many lives. And yet, there is a lesson we can learn there, that when confronted by that sin, David was truthful. Confession of sin, let me say this again, confession of sin is truthfulness in action. Truthfulness to ourselves and truthfulness to God. And when we are truthful to ourselves and truthful to God, only then can the healing begin. Well, tomorrow we'll continue our study of truthfulness as we take a look at two events, polar opposites, if you will. We're going to take a look at one event of lying in the Old Testament and another event of lying in the New Testament, and how God responded differently in both those cases. We'll look at that tomorrow as we continue talking about truthfulness and transforming the world. Have a great day. My name is Pastor Greg.